Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, the 22nd of May, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Let's go ahead and jump into our domestic roll-up items here. Good morning, Robert. All right, let's go ahead and start with CIA shifting priorities towards China. So where one CIA official said China is the greatest threat to the United States in an update that shocked everyone. But what's going on?
Good morning, Mike. Yeah, this is coming from CIA Deputy Director Michael Ellis. And in an interview yesterday, he did say that China is, quote, the existential threat to American security in a way we really have never confronted before. And in this interview, he said that China is the agency's new top priority. He did also add that the CIA is going to put more emphasis on combating drug cartels as well.
And so that would be combating drug cartels outside the United States.
Correct, and he said that they were going to elevate they have basically an internal anti-narcotics unit within the CIA that apparently until now has been basically a backwater within the agency, and I guess they're going to get a lot more funding now that the CIA is leaning into this anti-cartel new strategy.
Mm-hmm. And then I would just say this: I'm somewhat hopeful. Going after terrorists in the Middle East, North Africa, Southwest Asia is difficult for many reasons, not only, logistically, but culturally and just in terms of language and cultural differences. Mexico's our next door neighbor. Lots of people speak Spanish at a native level. I'm far more optimistic that CIA could be effective against the cartels. I'll say that. All right.
Well, I think it's also there was that recent DEA National Drug Threat Assessment, and I think another reason why there's been much more of a focus on the cartels from the Trump administration and trying to find some new ways to actually fight back against them is that in that assessment they said that I think it was CJNG, the Jalisco cartel, and another one they're basically calling them like a super cartel, and they're saying they're engaging in like billions of dollars of oil theft. And there's like a huge black market of these two cartels bringing oil stolen from the Mexican the Pemex over the border into Texas as part of this major oil black market that's built up over the last few years. And it's not just impacting Mexico's economy, it's also impacting the U.S. economy and taking away billions of dollars from U.S. oil companies as well. So I think that's part of this huge expansion of cartel activity, not just quantity of more cartel activity in the United States, but also basically breaking into new areas where they're majorly impacting both the Mexican and American economy has been a major driver of this Trump turn to focus a lot of attention on the cartels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just on that note briefly, in terms of oil theft, fuel theft, they will go and they'll actually cut holes in these fuel pipelines that are run by Pemex, which is a state-owned oil company, petroleum company in Mexico. And back in 2019, there was an explosion. I guess somebody was cutting a hole in a pipeline and there was a spark, and exactly what you think would happen happened. And it killed like over 100 people just horrifically in this explosion. So Mexico has not been able to get a handle on that. I'm not sure the CIA can, but it sure seems like going after the money. You have to tackle the money sources. And that is the center of gravity, I think, probably for these cartels. All right, Robert, please continue.
So the Commerce Department announced a preliminary determination yesterday that China-based producers of battery components, things that are like graphite and silicon, are benefiting majorly from Chinese government subsidies, and they're saying up to 721% subsidies. And this is a precursor to levying tariffs, both countervailing tariffs and anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese battery makers. So I think we're looking at the beginnings of a new round of tariffs against China after reportedly to the Trump administration in China have gotten to a 90-day pause on this U.S.-China trade war. And then next, moving over to New York, the U.S. Secret Service is expanding what they called Operation Flagship. And this was originally launched in California late last year, and they're going after organized crime groups that they say are stealing $18 billion a year through credit and debit card skimmers. And this was originally detected actually by the USDA when they said they detected major high dollar thefts from electronic benefits transfer cards that are used for like SNAP and cash assistance. And this is not as high dollar as cargo thefts, but looks like another of these organized crime activities that are taking billions of dollars a year out of the U.S. economy. And the Trump administration, it seems to be stepping up what looks to be a war against these organized crime groups. And then the FDA and the HHS are both making moves to make prescription drugs cheaper. The FDA announced yesterday that they're enhancing a program under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and they're going to allow states to import prescription drugs from Canada that are much lower priced. And they said they're also assisting states in streamlining this process. And then the Department of Health and Human Services yesterday made an announcement. They're asking pharmaceutical manufacturers to price drugs in the U.S. based on the lowest prices offered to members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They said that what they want is drug companies to actually fulfill their commitment to lower drug prices in the U.S. And if they don't, HHS is going to take action. There has been a response from the pharma industry on this. Leerink Partners, which is a health industry investment bank, said that their take is that the administration's demand is extreme and that the pharma industry can't actually deliver on this. And, quote, in our view, biopharma industry executives need to further educate the Trump administration about highly problematic aspects of this pricing expectation. So the pharma industry and the healthcare industry don't seem to be taking this push from the Trump administration for lower drug prices sitting down. Oh, and then last night there was actually a shooting in Washington, D.C. at an event where members of the Israeli embassy were participating, and 2 Israeli embassy staffers were killed. And apparently, I saw a clip of this when the D.C. police arrested the shooter. He shouted "Free Palestine," and Israel media is claiming the shooter was a member of the PSL, or the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Yeah, PSL is a regional political party, and I know they're up in Seattle, and I think the Pacific Northwest is primarily where they're based out of. I don't know if they have DC and New York chapters. I can look into it. However, it's so fascinating, Robert, because for so many years we have heard that white supremacists are the greatest threat to this country, and yet we have cartels previously committing crimes seemingly with impunity in the United States. And then, also we've seen several high-profile left-wing terror attacks. Essentially, I think that's really the only way you can describe them. And so it really does. I guess it's a good sign that a lot more focus is being put on this now. So,
Robert. Well, I think that there's been for years this graph going around that I think is from the ADL, showing that right-wing domestic terrorism is by multiple times, orders of magnitude, higher than Islamic terrorism or left-wing terrorism. But as far as I understand, when you actually dig into the numbers, they include a lot of things that would not traditionally be considered terrorism. Things like the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a prison gang, getting into a shootout with rival drug dealers or things like that. They include as right-wing terrorism. So I think the perception that right-wing terrorism is this rampant problem has been probably a little overblown.
Yeah, it is. I've dug into the numbers several times, and I just pulled them up here. So we hear from all these expert organizations and the expert analysts. They find that white racial extremists, or what you might call white supremacists, were responsible for 329 murders between 1994 and 2020, and that's roughly 13 killings per year, which is not insubstantial or unsubstantial. But, put that into context, Chicago, one city, had 770 murders in 20. That is twice the number of murders in 1 year that so-called white supremacists are responsible for over almost 26 years or so. So the focus on white supremacy is misplaced. We'll say that. Thanks for that, Robert. All right, let's move on here to our global sit rep. Jared, good morning. Let's start off with North Korea.
Absolutely. So not a great day for North Korea yesterday. Their latest modern destroyer capsized when the shipyard launched it. It went nose first. It's supposed to hit all at once. Didn't do that. Crushed it. The North Korean leader was present at the launch, and he described this as absolute carelessness and unscientific empiricism. He also promised to punish those responsible. Not really much of a surprise, but fun little note there, and gave them 1 month to repair and relaunch the vessel before there is a major North Korean meeting at the end of June. Then, probably most people saw this yesterday, but there was a public meeting between Presidents Trump and Ramaphosa of South Africa, or of the United States and South Africa, respectively. And in there, President Ramaphosa denied the murders of white South African farmers before President Trump opted to correct him via multiple videos and media reports. Then President Ramaphosa decided to try to downplay it several times and just say, well, this is just about land confiscation. And that's all part of a general crime wave. I think this is a very big deal because obviously these are presidents going at it, but the U.S. also previously refused to go to the G20 meeting in South Africa over this exact issue. And even just this week, Secretary Rubio has been defending the refugee status of these farmers to Congress in both chambers.
Mm-hmm. I would say this. I've seen the detractors and the very highly respected journalists in the United States say, well, white South Africans it's like 7-8% of the population and only 1% of the murders. So, it's obvious that South Africans don't really have it out for the whites there. That's what they say. I think the big problem is, yes, of course, there are lots of opportunistic murders and gang murders and, what you would not literally, but what you would describe as tribal violence or gang violence in South Africa, criminal elements. But the problem is you go back and you read that a couple of people were gunned down in a bad neighborhood, which is most of, in Johannesburg or whatever. And you read about that violence compared to the absolutely horrific murders of white farmers, and the two cannot be compared. So this is a place where the journalists will roll out these statistics and sweep the fine details under the rug. But this is a case where they can be what's that they say where they're really being dishonest. They're being factually dishonest. By using facts that are technically true, but extremely intellectually dishonest about what's actually happening in South Africa. We'll leave it there and move on. But let's talk about this Navy littoral ship here.
Yes. So the Navy continues to support the border mission down south here in the United States, and they deployed the USS Charleston, which is a littoral combat ship, along with a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment on board. Now, the reason this matters, these littoral combat ships are actually designed to get much closer. They have a very shallow draft. That's going to allow the Navy to conduct migrant and drug interdictions far closer to the beach and really keep our guys out of harm's way as they enforce border security. They are replacing a destroyer, which could not do this. Mm. And then moving over to Asia, we've previously covered the Sandy Cay. It's a sandbar real close to a Philippine permanent settlement. That's been that way for decades, if not centuries. And the Chinese Coast Guard attacked a Philippine fisheries vessel near that water. They attacked with water cannons and a sideswipe. China claims it's control measures, as they do. And the Philippines says that they were able to finish the mission. Now, like I mentioned, this is just a couple miles from a Philippine permanent settlement. But over the last couple of weeks since we initially covered it, there have been various times where forces from both sides go out without any opposition, plant a flag and say, this is ours. So it's changed hands in a sort of way, but not really. Nobody's settled it. And this is the first time the two forces have met.
All right. Interesting. Thanks for that update, Jared. And let's move on to our warning items. All right, Robert, I've seen this news article spread around, and people are saying this is going to lead to a constitutional crisis. It looks like basically you have conservative legal commentators, people who are actually attorneys, say this is judicial overreach on steroids. A, would you say that's accurate? And B, what's going on?
Well, so this is a standing order for the Maryland Federal District Court, and what they're basically saying here is that anytime the legal representation for an illegal immigrant or any immigrant who's being detained by the Trump administration files a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, basically an injunction is it's just automatically assumed that the Trump administration has an injunction against it for either deporting them or changing their legal status. And I think they're talking about what we pointed out yesterday with this temporary protected status. Like basically they're automatically blocking the Trump administration from either deporting or ending temporary protected status for somebody who's detained or an illegal immigrant who's detained. And as far as I can find, this is basically in response to 2 illegal immigrants who were deported to South Sudan. And this specifically mentions the Convention Against Torture, which is ratified by the Senate. And as part of that ratification, actually removed the jurisdiction for this from the district courts to the executive branch, Department of Justice, administrative courts. So from what I can see here and what I'm seeing legal analysts say is that this is basically circumventing Congress, because Congress removed the jurisdiction over this issue from these courts and gave it to the administrative courts under the executive branch. And yet, to me, it looks like the bottom line up front is that the lower federal court here is effectively stealing jurisdiction over immigration cases when it comes to asylum claims or claims that illegal immigrants might make that they're going to be tortured or otherwise persecuted if they're sent back to their home country. And that is, as far as I can find, the exclusive jurisdiction of the immigration courts and not these Article 3 district courts.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. Well, lots more to come on this, but I mean, is this one of those things we're going to hear about it from the Supreme Court?
I think we could. And I think the point behind this order it's not necessarily the goal is not, I don't think necessarily to say that, to assert that the federal district courts have jurisdiction here. I think the point is to hamstring the Trump administration's immigration agenda and to basically dare the Trump administration to openly defy the court, or in this case, even suspend habeas corpus for illegal immigrants.
Yeah, I agree. That does seem to be the intended longer term effect. The short term effect is you create barriers. Anything the Trump administration tries to do, you just create as many barriers and challenges as you can. All the while you're daring the administration to defy the course. I actually do think that's what they want, to force a constitutional crisis. And in that way, I guess it's going to be another long few years here. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's move on to, so in late March, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, said maybe Democrats didn't do enough to try to block this continuing resolution that Democrats went along with, implying that they would take more extreme measures in the future, like maybe trying to block future funding bills. And this is essentially, it appears to be what Tom Cole, a Republican from Oklahoma, is saying.
Yeah, this was a closed-door meeting with the House Appropriations Chair, Tom Cole, and he was warning Republicans that what he called shell-shocked Democrats. He's basically saying Democrats are shell-shocked from Trump's re-election in November. And he said they're the biggest threat to negotiating these must-pass spending bills by the 30 September deadline to keep the government open. And this was actually a hot mic moment that was caught by a reporter in the hallway. And I think that at this point, Republicans now recognize that Democrats are willing to risk forcing a partial government shutdown, especially after Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer got major blowback from his own party for voting for that continuing resolution. And I think they're willing to risk it to disrupt the Trump administration and the congressional Republicans' agenda. And I think that's because Democrats view this that historically the public has blamed the Republican Party for government shutdowns, and I think they likely want to take advantage of that going into the 2026 campaign season.
Mm-hmm. I'm not in the business of advising them politically. I would just say, at this point we see Treasury yields. The 30-year Treasury is up over 5% this morning, like 5.1%. It's the highest in nearly 20 years. The 10-year yield is up over 4.5, like 4.6%. Also among the highest levels that we have seen in 20 years. Unlike 20 years ago, we are in I'd say fiscal dire straits, and things are getting much worse. I would be very concerned that if Democrats do want to take this to the mat and force a government shutdown over whatever political demands or concessions they're trying to get from the Trump administration, I would be very concerned about the second and third order effects in terms of what it does for more credit downgrades, for capital flight, foreign investors selling off treasuries, selling out of the dollar, moving their money back home or moving their money back to other places where they think it's going to be safer. I mean, really, we're talking about potentially the end of safe haven status for treasuries and the dollar if we're not already there. And Deutsche Bank, I read this guy Savelos is one of the financial analysts over there. I read him every week. He's been among the most pessimistic and probably the single most issuing the single most dire warnings about the U.S. fiscal problem. And I will tell you that a government shutdown is just not something we need in light of all the background developments in terms of the full faith and credit of the United States. So, all right, Robert, thanks for that. Thanks for standing by also. All right, let's move on here to Wisconsin Republicans are pushing to redefine what a riot is. What's going on?
This is Wisconsin Assembly Bill 88, and this would define a riot as an assembly of 3 or more people that results in a public disturbance involving any act of violence. And this bill also makes it a felony to urge what they say urge, promote, organize, encourage, or instigate others to commit a riot. And according to this bill, an act of violence includes any what they say are clear and present danger of property damage, personal injury, or the threat of an act of violence. And this is, I think, part of a growing trend that we've seen since the Stop Cop City crackdown of states trying to do something about far left demonstrations and direct actions. Because as we've covered before, Georgia pursued RICO and terrorism charges against Stop Cop City activists and their support network at the Atlanta Bail Fund. And I think that's what Wisconsin is trying to do here, something similar to stop those far left demonstrations that I think they're probably predicting in the next couple of years. The Wisconsin Democrats said that the bill was shelved after some controversy over it, but as far as I could find, the Wisconsin Republicans that have introduced and are sponsoring this bill say it's still just undergoing the normal legislative process and they're waiting on a vote to be scheduled.
Mm-hmm. All right, like trying to get it out of committee or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And we'll move on here to the last item of the day. Now, Jared, when I first saw this, I thought, Jared, that's kind of it's a little bit of hyperbole. I thought this was like rhetorical, verbal warning shots. IDF soldiers, Israeli Defense Force soldiers, actually fired their weapons in response to these foreign diplomats. And this is, I guess, in Israel or Gaza. What's going on?
This is near the town of Jenin, and the IDF said, yes, we did this, and we did it because they deviated from the approved itinerary. So, gonna let those words stand as they will. And the Palestinian National Authority had organized this visit to show the diplomats the condition of Jenin. Now, it's a long list of nations. It's up over 20. But just the 7 most important nations to the United States here: China, France, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey were all involved. All of these people have outstanding diplomatic issues with Israel over Gideon's Straits right now anyways, which is the operation to clear Gaza. This, I mean, frankly, I don't see how this doesn't result in accelerating international pressure just to isolate Israel to get them to stop this war at this point, because the IDF is saying, yes, we're not shooting to kill diplomats, but we are shooting at diplomats to issue warning shots. Like that's it's kind of overused, but that is a violation of international norms.
All right. Sounds nuts to me. And by the way, let me just go back to this shooting that happened in DC, where you have this Palestinian activist / assassin at this point, I guess, killing these two people outside of this Israeli or Jewish facility. Last year, I was just looking at all these far left groups, and the rhetoric and the propaganda they were pushing online paled in comparison to what we saw in 2017. Obviously, I'm not even to mention 2020. The amount of training they were doing, training opportunities available, paled in comparison to 2017, much less 2020. The turnout we have seen for these far left direct action demonstrations have paled in comparison to 2017, much less 2020. Last summer, I started saying smaller but more violent. That was my base case, the most likely scenario I thought for these far left activists, and that is so far what we have seen. It has been smaller, but it has been more in terms of armed violence, actual shootings. It has been more violent. And I don't see any reason why we will not continue to see this kind of escalation as long as Israel continues their military operations in Gaza. And I'm not editorializing this. I'm not saying Israel should or should not do that, because that's not my decision, also not my job. However, as an analyst, I can look at the activist movement, the far left movement here in the United States, and have a pretty good gauge on how they're going to respond. And I don't see any reason why this type of stuff would stop. In fact, very likely to get worse as long as Israel continues on with these operations. So, Jared, thanks for that update. And let's go ahead and move on to our questions for today. Do you have any insight into the killing of the two aides in Mexico City yesterday? No, I don't. I saw it on the news, and there's a ton of stuff going on around here, so I did not have an opportunity to look into it. My understanding, there were advisors to the Mexico City mayor, and I believe Claudia Sheinbaum is I don't know if they call it. Mexico City is actually a federal district of Mexico, so they have like a governor. It's kind of weird. They have to be Morena people, so I haven't looked into it any further than that. And Morena is the leftist party that's essentially one party rule down there right now. All right, how do they define public disturbance? That could mean loud music. Yeah, Robert, seems like this pretty loose definition.
So in the bill itself, they don't define public disturbance, but I think the implication here is that this does not cover things like activities on private property, like somebody hosting a party. I think this specifically is aimed at gathering in a public area, like in front of a business or in front of a government office, rather than somebody hosting a party where they have loud music.
Yeah, so if they go out there with a loudspeaker and the drums and stuff that we've seen previously, that could be determined as a riot. A public disturbance doesn't that come from a police chief or from the city? They will declare a public disturbance and order people to disperse before they start being arrested.
I think that's normally the procedure that police departments would follow, rather than just start arresting people en masse. But looking through the language of the bill, they explicitly say that has to have some type of threat of violence, like I would assume like chance of calling for violence against the police or other groups of people. And what they said was a clear and present danger to property or life. So basically people conducting black bloc activity, I think would allow that through that law would allow the authorities to just to label a protest or demonstration as a riot.
For sure. Yeah. And after you saw what happened in Kenosha and Milwaukee and other places, Madison, makes sense. All right. Next question. The media is stubbornly in the pocket of leftist politics propagandists. Yeah, I would say the mainstream media definitely has an agenda, to be diplomatic about it. Ben Franklin said the overthrow of liberty must begin by subduing a free press. How does this get reined in? I think you just have to compete. I mean, I think you look at what Elon Musk has done with X and some of the conservative media outlets. I mean, the Fox News shows, whatever you think of Fox News, consistently beat out their cable competitors. So, this is something that Rush Limbaugh actually said back in 2016. I'll break this down for you, for those in Rio Linda. He said, and he was actually wrong about this. L. Rush Limbaugh was wrong for one time, but he said, you're not going to elect another Republican president until you get the media to under control, until you get the media to not be run by partisan hacks, the mainstream media. And so this is something that a lot of people have been talking about for a long time. I don't know, Ben, I think the answer is you've just got to compete. Obviously, I know the FCC has been talking about restricting broadcast licenses for news that, and this is what they do. Just about this thing with NPR. For years, I listened to NPR every single day. And they say, NPR says that they're centrist or they're nonpartisan or whatever. But the problem that NPR has is a problem of they will omit certain information. And I know this because I'm in the information business and I would listen to NPR and they would conveniently leave some facts out. And so they could say, well, we have non-biased reporting as to what we report, but they're extremely biased in what they don't report. And it was really funny because the CEO of NPR was on Face the Nation a couple Sundays ago doing this interview, talking about how talking about their financial dire straits because of these Doge cuts. And, the CEO said, well, we are, in so many words, we are fair and balanced. And then one sentence later, she said, and we're trying to get conservatives onto NPR to give their side of the story. Well, if they're fair and balanced, then they should have had conservatives on giving their side of the story for years. And I'll just say this too, just as a consumer, I record and watch all the Sunday shows, unfortunately, just to see what they're talking about. Because I think it's a good gauge. I mean, I think it's a really good metric in terms of what's kind of in the national zeitgeist, at least in the mainstream media. And, well, I won't digress any further. But how do you rein them in? I don't know. Way out of my lane. Speaking of FCC, whatever happened to Soros purchasing radio stations? I don't know. That's a good question. I know he was trying to. I don't know if those went through or not. We'll have to follow up. Regarding the Golden Dome and China's recent demand to scrap the project, will the Golden Dome, as it is proposed, even be able to intercept most missiles from an adversary like China or Russia? That's a Jared question.
Once we get finalization on what systems will be there, I can give you a much better answer. But generally, I think, yes, it's going to be dictated by the threat, similar to how you do an area study to figure out what to prepare for. But we covered this ad nauseum a week ago, I think, when the DIA released that graphic. So I would recommend going back if you want a full answer on what I expect will need done. In short, you increase your chances of hit by finding the missile early, developing your firing solution, and intercepting it.
All right. Would it be able to intercept most missiles from Russia or China?
Yeah, you increase your chance of intercept by, and nothing is ever zero, by the way. You increase your chance of intercept by just finding it early. That way you can actually build a firing solution, because most of these are on a ballistic path anyway, so you know where they're going to go.
Okay, so maybe. Yeah. What about these missiles that can be like steered?
There are other ways.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Next question. Did you hear that there was another shooting outside the CIA front gate? Any thought? I did not see that this morning. I've been looking into the Bond situation all morning long. Jared, Robert, did y'all see anything?
Yeah, it happened very early this morning. I think like right before we started the show, or a couple hours before we started the show. From what I could find, what allegedly happened is a woman tried to ram the front gate at the CIA headquarters in Virginia, and was shot at by security guards, but was not killed. But the CIA has not released any other information other than they've shut down their main gate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. All right. Anything else, Jared?
Nope, all caught up.
All right, everyone. Well, that's going to do it for this morning's briefing. We appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.